I have a confession to make. I own a ridiculous amount of cookbooks, and I've never baked anything from more of them than I'd care to admit. But today, I'm fixing that. Now, I'm going to choose a recipe from one of these books and make it with you. I'll need to make several components, and I don't even know what a few of them are. I'm sure we've all asked ourselves at one time or another, what the f*** are crepe dentelle cookies? Well, apparently they're these little crispy rolled up things that Amazon thinks is worth almost $45. Nope. I'll just have to figure out how to make them myself, and luckily it looks like it's not very complicated. First, I'm melting some butter, to which I'm adding some granulated sugar and whisking until dissolved. Then in go a couple egg whites, which are whisked until smooth. Finally, I'm adding in some all-purpose flour and whisking that in until combined. On a parchment-lined baking sheet, I'm pouring the batter out in strips that I spread out with an offset spatula until as thin and even as possible. And popping it into a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for 5 or 6 minutes until golden brown. I'm rolling these up while still hot into cute little packages. It turns out these just get crushed into pieces later on for the bottom layer of the cake, so I could have just baked them in one big thin sheet and skipped the rolling. But apart from a tiny first-degree burn on my fingertips, this was fun to do anyway. Next, I have to make some almond praline paste. So first, I'm going to weigh out the almonds I had left in my pantry to find out how much sugar I will need. These get toasted in a 325-degree Fahrenheit oven for 8 to 10 minutes. Next, the sugar. Damn it, lady, use a tripod when you're weighing ingredients. Jeez. Okay, that's better. Pop the sugar into a small saucepan. Pour in enough water to cover the sugar. Stir until the sugar is just about dissolved, and then leave it alone until it turns a nice dark amber color. Then carefully pour the caramel over the almonds still on their baking sheet and leave until cool to room temperature. I broke it all up into chunks small enough to fit in my food processor, warned my family and entire street about the horrible noise about to commence, and blitzed it until it formed a smooth paste, stopping a few times to scrape it down. I'm warning you, making praline paste is a dangerous skill to acquire, and you'll want to eat this stuff straight out of a bowl with a spoon. Now, I'll make the bottom crunchy layer of the cake, starting by crushing up the cookies I spent all that time rolling up for some reason. Next, over a pot of gently simmering water, I'm melting down some chopped dark chocolate and setting it aside. Some almond praline paste gets added to the crushed crepe dentelle cookies and combined. Followed by the melted chocolate. The original recipe called for a rectangular pastry frame, which I don't have. I do have a 5.5-inch cake ring, so I'm going to use that instead, lined with a strip of acetate. The crunchy chocolate and almond praline mixture gets pressed evenly into the bottom and chilled in the fridge until firm. Next, it's time to start making the chocolate sponge by separating 4 eggs The egg whites go into the clean bowl of a stand mixer and whipped on medium-high speed until foamy, at which point I gradually add the sugar and whip on medium-high speed to stiff peaks. transfer the meringue to a separate bowl. In a small bowl, I'm combining some granulated sugar with cocoa powder to remove any lumps from the cocoa powder before combining it with the egg yolks and whipping everything until smooth and light. I'm adding 1/3 of the meringue and folding it into the egg yolk mixture to lighten it up, before gently folding in the remaining meringue in 2 more additions. I'm spreading the batter out evenly on a parchment-lined baking sheet, while pausing to make sure it will be large enough to cut out 2 round layers before popping it in a 340-degree Fahrenheit oven. Now I'm making the chocolate syrup, which will be used to soak each layer of the cake. I'm putting some water and granulated sugar into a small saucepan, whisking until combined, and bringing it up to a gentle simmer. Now I'm whisking in the cocoa powder until smooth and homogeneous, and setting the syrup aside to cool. Finally, I'll make the chocolate mousse. Into a bowl placed over a pot of gently simmering water goes some dark and milk chocolate, stirred until melted and removed from the heat. In goes some warmed milk, which gets whisked until smooth and set aside while the heavy cream gets whipped to soft peaks. I'm folding in 1/3 of the whipped cream into the melted chocolate to lighten it up, then the remainder of the whipped cream in 2 more additions. And this is the point where I realized I should have used my cake ring to stamp rounds out of my sponge cake before putting in the bottom crunchy layer, because now I have to cut them out with a knife and they're turning out really rough around the edges, and I'm just hoping this cake will be crammed full with enough chocolatey goodness that nobody will notice. First, I'm putting down the ugliest of the 2 cake rounds and patching it up with a scrap of cake, then soaking it liberally with about half of the chocolate syrup, followed by about half of the mousse. Always remember to spill a little on your counter for good luck. I'm borrowing a tip I learned from Christina Tosi of Milk Bar, and I'm smoothing out the mousse using a bent tablespoon. Works like a dream. While the cake chills in the fridge, I'm making the chocolate mirror glaze, starting by blooming powdered gelatin in some cold water for 5 to 10 minutes. Then in a small saucepan, I'm adding some water, heavy cream, and granulated sugar, and whisking until smooth. Then bringing it all to a gentle simmer before adding cocoa powder and whisking again until smooth. I'm turning off the heat, and while the mixture is still warm, I'm adding the bloomed gelatin and whisking until melted and combined. I'm passing the glaze through a sieve into a spouted measuring cup to make it easy to pour over the cake later, and leaving it to cool down. With the mirror glaze cooled to around 80 degrees Fahrenheit and the cake fully chilled, I'm almost ready to begin pouring the glaze. First though, I have to remove the ring and the acetate strip from around the cake. And because mirror glaze looks best when the cake underneath is nice and smooth, I'm torching an offset spatula so I can melt and smooth the top mousse layer out. I found a bar of Lindt caramel and sea salt chocolate in my pantry, which I thought would make a lovely and delicious border around the bottom of the cake, while, hiding any glazing imperfections there. So I chopped it up into little shards, which I applied all around the bottom edge of the cake. Now I'm using a sheet of paper folded in half to mask out part of the cake while sprinkling some cocoa powder through a sieve onto the other half of the cake. There you have it. This cake was delicious, extremely chocolatey, soft, crunchy, and decadent. Everything you could possibly want from a chocolate cake. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.